So we've talked about spreadsheets a lot the past couple of weeks. So isn't it time we talk about the elephant in the room? Problems with spreadsheets. Because you must have encountered them in the exercises or maybe in your daily job with spreadsheets, you run into problems with spreadsheets. And it's not so surprising if you remember the numbers from the first week that 95% of all companies still use spreadsheets. And that 50% of spreadsheets are used in decision making. And then of course it's not so surprising that problems arise. And you remember maybe also that spreadsheets have a very long lifespan, 5 years on average, during which they are used by 12 different people, and most spreadsheets do not have proper documentation. So there's actually no way, if you think about it, that this could go right. If it's so important for companies and many people are involved, things are bound to get wrong, and they just do. There even is a European spreadsheet risk interest group, Expector, that keeps a list of spreadsheet horror stories. It's quite funny. If you have some time after the exercises of this week, I recommend you go there and have a look at a lot of companies and organizations that run into some kind of trouble from very small to very large problems because of spreadsheets. And I've compiled the most fun 3 spreadsheet horror stories. Here's one that I really like, the London Olympics in 2012. So you would expect the London Olympics, like the biggest event of the year with a gazillion pounds in budget, to have a very sophisticated ticketing system. They don't. They used spreadsheets to keep track of the tickets they've sold, and they made a tiny mistake in one of their spreadsheets, and this ended up by one of the stadiums being overbooked by 10,000 tickets. So it's not really money loss, but it was of course very embarrassing. People had to come into the tickets office to exchange their tickets for another day. So it's a really nice example of a spreadsheet horror story. Here's another one. A university in the US lost $2.4 million because of a spreadsheet problem. And here's another one. A Canadian power company lost $24 million because of a copy-paste error in a spreadsheet. So of course it's very easy to blame spreadsheets. You could say spreadsheets are just bad and this is why we have mistakes. But that's really not fair. This is not a typical spreadsheet problem. If you look at other domains, for instance programming, programming has very similar error rates to spreadsheet development. About 1 to 5% of all lines of code or all formulas have an error. And the same goes for other cognitive design activities like creative writing. Also, if you're writing, you tend to make tiny mistakes. Just human brains aren't better than a 1 to 5% error ratio. And this is understandable, and if you look at problems in programming, very similar type of horror stories exist, very recent horror stories in the programming domain. So here you have healthcare.gov. There recently were a few very big bugs like Heartbleed and the go-to fail. So you can't really blame spreadsheet for being problematic because other types of programming really run into very similar problems. So why is that? Like everything, spreadsheets and software products start small. They start with small little cute puppies. You can easily manage them because they're still young and simple. Same goes with spreadsheets. You start off one worksheet, bunch of formulas, looks very cute, nothing is problematic. However, they all grow up to be this guy, right? If you don't train your dog and if you don't manage your spreadsheet or manage your software, everything will go wrong. So that's exactly what this week's videos are about. We will talk about how to manage your spreadsheet and make sure that it grows up into a responsible dog and not a crowd-shredding monster. So, how to manage your spreadsheet? That is the central question of this week's video. How to make sure that that cute little spreadsheet puppy is not going to turn into this huge monster. That everything remains clear and calm and error-free. So in order for us to dive into how to manage a spreadsheet, we're going to look again at the hardware store. I hope you remember this example where we export data from a register and analyze our sales in a spreadsheet. So here's a recap of the data that is in this spreadsheet. We have a list of items that we're selling. We have their names, their selling and purchasing price, the margin, which is the difference between the purchasing and the selling price, and the same margin expressed in percentage. So this is really a very small spreadsheet. There's hardly anything that could go wrong with such a small example. So in this sense, it's really useful as a running example because it's really like the puppy. It's super small, so if we make sure that while it's still small, it behaves well, it might grow up to be a responsible spreadsheet. So remember also from the second week's videos that if you use a link, for example, in a spreadsheet, a direct link to another worksheet, if you start sorting the links, everything gets messed up. So this is a typical risk in a spreadsheet. And our solution so far was just to make sure that we use the right formulas. We know how to build the formulas, and we know that if we use an index match function, that nothing goes wrong, that even if you sort the other part of your spreadsheet, then still you get the right results. However, remember that many things in your spreadsheet can go wrong. This is just one example. There are so many things that could potentially go wrong. Maybe you input the wrong value. Maybe you use the wrong formula. Maybe you miss copy-paste and you copy-paste your data in a wrong part of the spreadsheet. And it's not just you. You are not the only one working with the spreadsheet. In a typical situation, 12 different people are working with one spreadsheet. So maybe you know what to do after you followed this MOOC, but does everyone else involved in your office in the spreadsheet? If you send your spreadsheet to someone from sales, will they also know what formulas to use? So everything in this week's videos is about how to keep our spreadsheet safe, how to keep the spreadsheet safe and keep the bad influences out. Wrong inputs, wrong formulas, how are we going to protect ourselves from those bad inputs? And remember, other disciplines have very similar problems, like programming, but also hardware design. If you build a car, this car is not going to go on the highway before it has been extensively stress tested. We do these type of things with cars before we even allow someone to drive in them. Other domains use testing to make sure that whatever they build is really well structured. And that is exactly the approach that we are going to take in this week's video. We're going to stress test our spreadsheet and make sure that nothing can go wrong. So I'm sure you're now convinced you have to test your spreadsheet in order to avoid horrible problems. But then of course the question is, what to test? If we look at a spreadsheet, where to start and what are those typical situations, typical formulas that could go wrong? Let's have another look at our hardware example. If we look at this example, if you download it from the edX website, then you can have a look with me at what could exactly go wrong. For example, if you look at this margin formula. What do we know about a margin? Are there specific rules that hold for margins? Well, if you think about it a little bit, probably this margin should be bigger than 0. Probably we don't want to sell things for a lower price than we have bought them for. There are some businesses that do that. Maybe you have a super special promotion, but I'm just going to guess for a normal company, the rule is your margin has to be above 0. So you try it. Download the spreadsheet from the edX website and have a look at what are typical testings. This is not an exercise that you have to fill out. I just hope you're going to keep a list on a piece of paper, and then in this video, maybe I will talk about some of the tests that you had also thought about. So let's look at this margin. You could say that this margin, the fact that it has to be above 0, is some sort of a sanity check. Does my spreadsheet make sense? And these are common, these type of sanity checks. You have knowledge about your business domain and you know what typical rules should hold. And those rules help, and those rules are exactly what you want to test. So what else could we test? If we look at this percentage here, that's another thing where if you see a percentage, you think, hey, I know something about a percentage. Probably the percentage should be between 0 and 100%, because that's how percentages work. So if you see something like that, immediately your test sense should go off in the back of your head and you think, ha, a percentage. I know something about that. I know what boundaries hold for a percentage. And that's another type of checking your data. If you see a specific value, you think about what are logical boundaries. For currencies, often 0 is a logical boundary because you don't want to sell less than 0. Or if you're, as we do here, you're counting a number of items, 0 might also be a good boundary because we don't want to sell, we can sell less than 0 items. Can you think of more? Are there other tests on your list, on your sheet of paper where you were taking notes? Do you have others? Here's another one that you could try. The sum of those percentages that we're calculating here should be 100% because we divide all our profit over different items that we're selling. So if you group all of them together, it should add up to 100%, or something is wrong with our formulas or our input. And this is what we call a totals check. We add everything together and then the total should be 100%. That's usually a totals check, or the total should be equal to whatever we are selling. And there's something more we can do in this example in addition to the totals check. What we could do is calculate the totals in a different way. What we could do is sum the values here, but we also sum all the turnovers together, and that should also be 100%. So now we calculate our values in a different way, and we see here that we also get 100%. And this is called a cross-check, where we calculate the same result in two ways. And then if we make a mistake in one of them, as you see here, we immediately see that those values don't add up anymore. One of them is 100% and the other is not. This is called a cross-check. And this is very common in financial statements, where you calculate your values in this direction and in this direction, and then you make sure in the end they actually calculate the same thing. So these are a bunch of ways that you can test your spreadsheet: sanity checks, boundary checks, and total checks. So in the previous video, we talked about how to test your formulas, how to make sure that the results they deliver are within reasonable boundaries, for example. But there's another way we can test. What's also very important in spreadsheet testing is validating user input. If you look at this spreadsheet, this selling price right here, it's an input value. A user puts in that input and he could make a mistake. And we want to let the user know as early as possible that he has made a mistake. For instance, if we enter a new item here, the stone table, if I make a mistake and I accidentally input a negative number, then suppose we would have a check on the percentages, we would know because we see now that that percentage is off the chart. So that cannot be correct. But there are more subtle ways in which we could make a mistake. Maybe we enter the same number twice, and then this percentage is 0, which might be okay. That might still be within the boundaries. So what we want to have is 4 fields, 4 cells, where spreadsheet users add their input, have some validation rules right on top of them. Here's another example of validating user input. If we look at this register import, we see all the codes of the items that we have been selling. And this formula, the category formula, it just chops off the first item, the first character of the text, and puts it in a list. So suppose we add a pivot table on top of that data, calculating the profit per category. We need to be sure that that category is actually an existing category, that is actually in our list of categories. And we have another worksheet where we keep track of the categories. We would want the user to know if a faulty input is provided, a code is given with no associated category, we would like the user to have an error. And a lot more validation is possible in this input worksheet. I'm not going to tell you how, because this is one of this week's exercises. So you can start thinking about it right now. How would you validate the user input in this spreadsheet? What's important about tests is, you remember from the previous video, that spreadsheets only 1 in 3 have a manual. And you might think, what does documentation have to do with testing? Those are 2 entirely different topics. That's really not true. Tests can serve as a means of documentation. If you put a test in your spreadsheet, the test tells a user of the spreadsheet something about it. If I look at this formula here, so I have added a formula that checks whether a given item has an existing category. And if it don't, here you have a code that starts with an X. If there's no associated category, you get an error. So this test tells a story. This test expresses to the user that only existing categories can be inputted, otherwise something is wrong. So in this way you can use tests to communicate information about your input to your future self if you still work with the spreadsheet in 5 years, or maybe one of the 11 other people that are using the spreadsheets. So tests are a means of documentation, in addition to, of course, their purpose as actually checking for errors. So you know about testing, you know why you should test, and you know what to test, but we didn't address yet how to test. How are we going to express to the user of the spreadsheet that a test is broken? Well, there are 2 different ways that you can test in a given spreadsheet, as you see here. The first thing you can use is conditional formatting. Maybe you've used this before. Conditional formatting is a feature in Excel where you can change the color or the format of a cell based on specific rules. Here you see how it works. So suppose we want to add conditional formatting on the margin column. We select the entire column and then we select conditional formatting. We get a pop-up screen, and in the screen we can select, there we go, we can select, we want to have a rule for values that are below a certain threshold. And then we can say below what threshold should it be, and we say if it's below 0 we want to have it become red. And then you see it becomes red for all the values below 0. And it immediately works for the entire column because we selected the entire column when we added the rule. So if we add another new item to our catalog and we make a mistake, we immediately get the red value in the cell. Conditional formatting is nice. It works really well because, as you can see, the erroneous values, they really hit the eye. They attract your attention because they're really different from the other values. However, this is not my preferred way of testing. First of all, cell colors can have a different meaning. You can use conditional formatting, for instance, as we do here, where the red values do not indicate an error. What they indicate here is the percentage is below 10%. And that just means the item isn't selling very well. Only less than 10% of the profit is coming from this item. So that doesn't mean there's a mistake in my formulas. That means that I should do a good review of my product catalog to make a decision, am I still going to sell this item? So sometimes the colors red don't indicate wrong values, but they indicate problematic values, a product or an account that just isn't selling so well. That's one reason why you don't want to use conditional formatting, and another reason is that if you do it in a different way, as I'm going to show you, you can build formulas on top of the test formulas. So let me show you how I prefer to do it. Not with conditional formatting, so we're going to clear all the conditional formatting rules, and what we're going to do is add a test formula. So in another column we say, is the margin okay? And there we add a formula that expresses what we expect from the values. So we say, hey, if this value is below 0, we say error, this is too low, and otherwise it's okay. And if we drag the formula down, you see that those erroneous values get a notification, error, too low. And if you do it like this, you can build formulas on top of it. As I said before, you can use this value because it's just another cell value. You can use it as the input for another formula. And this might sound a little bit cryptic, so let me show you what I exactly mean with that. So what we can do here is add an overall test formula where we're going to check, is there an error in the list of our checks? So what we do is we count, we use a count if, and we count the number of OKs in the whole margin column. And from the number of OKs, we subtract the general number, with a count A, the number of all items in the list. And now we see that this is not 0, it's -2, which means we don't have the same number of OKs as the total number of values that we have. That means not everything is okay, so there is an error. We can add, and we don't want -2 as a value. We want, again, to make this into a test formula. So we say, if it's -2, then it's an error. If it's any value below 2, then there's an error, and otherwise it's okay. So now we've built a test formula on top of all the test formulas that we already had. And we can repeat this process. We can add a number of columns next to it and say for all of the columns, add another test formula. And we can repeat this trick at the higher level where those 4 column tests, again, we're going to combine them into one test where we count the number of OKs, and the number of OKs should be equal to the number of items, test cells in our list. So now we can have one big test at the end of our worksheet where all the test columns and all the overall tests come together. And then this is a formula again where we want to add conditional formatting, because this error, there's no way this can mean anything else. If a cell that says error is red, probably something is up. There's no other meaning that this could have. So for such a funnel test formula, adding conditional formatting is a really good idea. So in the previous video, I showed you how to add test formulas to your spreadsheet, and also how to add overall tests that combine the input of those tests together. However, there's a downside to this. If you look at the spreadsheet, let me show it to you, you see an error here. What do you have to do? You have to go up. Oh, there's an error in the margin. You have to scroll to the tests. You have to scroll down. Oh, what row is the error on? Oh, it's there. And then you have to trace all the steps to see what actually goes wrong. So in case of an error, there's a lot of work you have to do to pinpoint exact location of the error. So what can you do? Let me show you an easy trick to more quickly pinpoint where errors are. What you can do is add another column to your overall test set. Let me zoom out a bit so we have some more room. We add an additional column where we're going to detect the location of the failing test. And we can use the good old match function for that. I hope you remember it from all the way back in like the second week of videos. We can use that to detect what the line of the error is. So we add a match and we're looking for the value error. So in the first one, there is no error, so we simply get an NA, a non-available error. No problem, we're only interested in this result for the situations where there actually is an error. So if we add a match there, you see that the result of the match function is the row on which we have the error, row 9, that's actually where the mistake is. So if you add a match function like this, you don't have to search manually for the erroneous lines. You get the result with the match function, and you can see, hey, line 9 is the line with the error. And this is especially useful if you have like hundreds of lines, then you want to know on what line the error is. You don't want to scroll there, and maybe you also don't want to use a filter for the erroneous lines. You just want to quickly locate it. So let's design our spreadsheet a bit better. We add a border around all the test formulas so that it's really clear for whoever is going to use this spreadsheet after us that this is a special part of the spreadsheet. And what I like to do is then add a link to the final test formula on top of my worksheet. So I say, are all checks okay, my overall check, and I just link to the error formula downstairs. So that I can see immediately if I open the worksheet, is everything okay, yes or no? And maybe I don't always have my test block on the downside of my spreadsheet. If I have a very long worksheet, maybe I place my check box somewhere to the left of all my formulas or somewhere to the right, wherever there's logical place in my worksheet. So it's a very good idea to link to the first line of your worksheet if something is wrong, that you can see it immediately if you open it. And I can repeat this trick for all of the other worksheets as well. Let me zoom back in and then go to the other worksheets. In the other worksheets, we had some test formulas as well. So if I add this test formula in all of the worksheets on cell B1, on the first line, it's very easy for whoever is going to use the spreadsheet to immediately see, is everything okay? And what I can do then, if I have installed all of these tests on all of the worksheet, is add an all checks worksheet in which I'm going to combine all those tests for all of the worksheets in one overall testing worksheet. So I can use the indirect function here. You remember that from the previous lecture, where I can input a string, a text, and it will evaluate the result. So as a string, I use the name of the worksheet and B1, and then for all of the worksheets, I immediately get the results without any additional formulas. And then, of course, there's only one thing I can still do, and I'm sure you have guessed what my next move will be, is add one more test formula on top of those tests. Again, I'm going to count the number of OKs and compare the number of OKs with the total number of lines of rows in my worksheet. And if they are the same, it's okay. And if not everything is an okay, there is an error in my spreadsheet. So I've added tests everywhere in my spreadsheet. I gather all of them together, and in one value on one worksheet, the one check, the one test to rule them all, this test tells me, is everything in my spreadsheet as I expect it to be? And in this way, if I send my spreadsheet to another department, another colleague, another company, maybe a customer, if they mess something up, either in the formulas or in the input values, and I get my spreadsheet back, I just simply have to go to my one check formula, and then I can see, is everything okay? Is everything still as I expect it to be, or is maybe something wrong? And that's a very good way to keep your spreadsheet safe. In the previous video, I've shown you how to test your spreadsheet using formulas in Excel. And it's a fine way to test spreadsheets. There's nothing wrong with it. However, in this video, I'm going to show you an alternative way of testing, using Expector, an Excel plugin that we have developed here at Delft University of Technology. So this is where we left it off at the previous video. We made a number of tests and an additional worksheet in which we add overarching tests, tests that combine all other tests. But this is a role that Expector is going to fill for us now. So we don't need this additional worksheet anymore. You can just delete it from your example spreadsheet. We delete this as well because these two are overarching test formulas, not individual tests. And these can go as well. And if you have a keen eye, you have already seen that I have an additional something on my ribbon here called Expector. And if you install Expector, you will have this extra ribbon tab as well. And if we click it, you see all the options that Expector provides us. And let's start with the first one, find existing tests in this spreadsheet. If you click that button, Expector is going to look for what in the spreadsheet looks like a test. So something that is a sum of a range doesn't look like a test. But something that is, hey, if A1 is bigger than 100, then error, that looks like a test. And Expector scans the entire spreadsheet and shows you these type of formulas. Let's see how that looks like. Here is the output you get if you hit Find Tests. And the first one, for example, says G4 looks like a test, and it expresses that C4 should not be below 0, otherwise you get an error. If you click Save, Expector adds an additional worksheet for you and a list of all the tests in them. Again, here we see C4 should not be below 0, otherwise something is wrong. And in addition to the test, you also get a link back to the origin of the test that helps you navigate from the overall testing worksheet to the origin of the test. So in a sense, we are now in the same situation as we were in the beginning of this video. We have a number of tests and we have a worksheet that collects all the tests for us. However, this worksheet has been auto-generated. And that allows us to run the test. And this is something we couldn't do before. So if you click Run All Tests, Expector looks at all the tests one by one and says, well, these are all okay, they are passed, but these are failed tests. And And if you look at them, indeed you see here, this E11 is below 0. A test has failed there. And if you're more of a visual type of person, then you can also color the test. So you don't look at the list, you can immediately say, hey, the green ones are fine, and the red ones, something is up here. So Expector helps you to find the tests that are okay and to find the tests that still need attention, in a similar way as we had the old checks worksheet before. But Expector can do more. Expector can not just help you understand how your spreadsheet is doing now, it can also help you to add more security, add more logs, add more tests to your spreadsheet. That is all happening in the second column. We can ask Expector, how are we doing? And it says, well, 27% of your entire spreadsheet is now tested. And here again we can get this feedback in a visual way. All the tests and all the cells that the tests use are made yellow. So you can see this area of my spreadsheet is entirely covered by tests. And if we do that again in this worksheet, we see there's a gap. These cells are not being tested yet. And the first one, the name, that's not bad, that's just a string. But this one here is a VLOOKUP function. And we know, of course, from a few weeks back that such a VLOOKUP function can result in errors. So this is something we might want to test. And this happens in the third column of the Expector functionality. Here we can get assistance from Expector to add new tests to the worksheets. So for instance, if we click this first button, give us a complex formula. Well, this VLOOKUP is a complex formula, and if you want to add tests, you get a number of options. You can, for instance, define what type it needs to be. Well, this name, it needs to be text. We know that. If there's not text there, something is up. Thank you, says Expector. You have increased the coverage of your spreadsheet from 27 to 28%. You have covered more. And here you see in the Expector worksheet, indeed, a new test is added, and this bench, this B4, is now tested. There are two other options you can use in Expector. It can also detect large valued cells. For instance, this one, this 999 there. That's a high value. That might be something that you want to add a test for. For example, you don't want to have sold 0 items, or maybe below 0. A third option you have is you can look for formulas with a lot of precedence, a lot of cells that they refer to. These are also cells that you might want to test because they are the culmination of an entire formula chain. And the reason I have not been added tests to these cells is that you have to think about these specific tests, these high values and these formulas with a lot of precedence. How would you test them? That is one of this week's exercises. So good luck with that. Think about how to add coverage, increase the stability and the safety of the spreadsheet. So that's all I wanted to show. If you use Expector, which you can download from our website, feline.com/Expector, you get more safety in your spreadsheet. And what is also nice for us, if you try Expector, let us know what you think. Is it useful? Is it helping you? In that way, we can make our spreadsheet research even stronger. See you next week!